And we'll be talking in context with perennial vegetables in a forest garden situation. In a hell of a lot of perennial vegetables. With if everyone knows what perennial vegetables are compared to annual vegetables, does everybody understand what the idea of perennial is? You understand what annuals are? Annual means you put them in every year. Alright, so typically a tomato, that's a classic annual vegetable. Only lasts for a season, then next year you have to put another line. That's what it is. Whereas perennial vegetables, once you put them in, typically you're there for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on what you're trying to do. And the advantage of perennial vegetables over annual crops, I mean, our society is basically built on annual crops. Everything we basically consume in the supermarket as far as vegetables are concerned are basically annuals. And that's led to a few problems with the planet, to be honest with you. There's all that cultivation, there's all that digging to grow and produce the range of annual vegetables of which we demand has produced a society that in some cases is unbalanced. The soils are fairly sick and it costs a lot more energy to maintain an annual vegetable garden. Who's got a normal vegetable garden here?
Well,
right.
What's normal? Yeah, that's what I said.
I've got an abnormal vegetable garden.
That's a normal one too. Yeah, define normal.
It takes a lot of work to do. And one of the main reasons for that is when you're constantly digging to put annuals in. And that takes a lot of energy. On a global scale, you've got tractors and things like that. But even in your backyard, it takes a lot of energy to produce that. Whereas the perennial system, you tend to plant them once and leave them, just harvest and harvest and harvest again. So they're very good at looking after. You're very good at looking after your sort of soil. Now, when you dig your soil, what are you doing when you dig? Actually, I'll go back a bit. Annuals. What are annuals? When you dig your soil up and you don't plant anything, what do you get in there first?
Annuals.
Yeah. What do you get? What do you get? Weeds? Yeah. That's what annuals actually are. They're weeds. So most of us are actually eating cultivated weeds. And what are the functions of weeds in an environmental sense? They're there to repair. If you get a cut, what happens? All the antibodies race over and try and fix it. That's what weeds are to the earth. They're trying to heal the wound you've just made in the soil. You've got the thing called succession. Just to get back, to understand succession to the lineal scale, as far as a garden is concerned, or a forest, or the ecosystem, you start over here with parent rock. Right? When the earth was first formed, they tell us there was nothing here, it was just rock. And then slowly but surely, bacteria gets on the rock, they break it down, and then you get lichens, right, acting on the rock, they break it down, and eventually it becomes soil. So you might end up with some pebbles on the driveway, something like that. What happens if you want to maintain that driveway? What's the first thing to come in? Weeds, right? And so the weeds, and then eventually as you go further down, the weeds will produce more soil as they break down and form compost in the soil. And then eventually you'll get a shrub form, and then eventually you'll get a tree form. If you didn't cultivate your vegetable garden for a year, 2 years, 5 years, what would happen? It'd basically go back to that. Yeah. 10 years, 20 years, it'd be a forest, absolute forest. And so in a lot of ways we're actually competing against nature. Nature wants to produce a forest in your vegetable garden, and it's going to try it no matter what you're doing. And so perennial vegetables and things like that, we're actually acting a little bit more towards what nature wants, and what nature's trying to actually do. The other good thing about these sort of systems is every time you dig your soil, you're actually you're preparing the soil for weeds. And the reason you're doing that is you've got different things in the soil. You've got different soil biology in the soil. And the closer you go from grassland to forest, it goes more fungal dominated. So down here it's bacterial dominated, up here it's fungal dominated. dig it over, you're killing all the funguses in the soil. Does anybody know what a healthy soil looks like as far as microbes go? I've done this talk a few times now, and everybody out there, what's he talking about? In a teaspoon of good compost soil, how many bacteria should you have in a good compost soil?
Millions.
Millions. How many species of bacteria you reckon in a teaspoon of good soil? 5,000. No, 20,000. Sorry, 20,000 species of bacteria should be in that little bit of soil. How many funguses should be in that soil? 5,000 species in a little bit of soil. That's what you should look at. That's a good soil. And then you should have some protozoa and some microarthropods and some, maybe a worm, but it'd be probably a pretty small worm. But that's what's a good soil. If you've got that sort of soil, you're not going to have a problem with nutrition. You're not going to have a problem with pests. You're not going to have a problem with a whole stack of stuff. If you've got that type of soil, you're going to have good water holding capacity in the soil. What happens with the function of bacteria in a soil is they make what they call little micro-aggregates. You know the crumbly texture in your soil? That's all because you've got good biology. They're like little tiny aggregates of soil. The bacteria actually glue those little particles together and form micro-aggregates. And then the funguses come along and they'll group those things together and make macro-aggregates, the big clumps in your soil. That's what they're doing. If you get that, you start to get good holding capacity. And when they're doing that, they're producing humus and composts and things like that, and you're making your soil really healthy. But every time you dig that, or every time we plough it up, you're destroying that. You destroy your soil. Every time you dig it, you kill your soil. So the idea is minimal cultivation. If you want to have good soil and good water holding capacity in your gardens, stop digging. Starters. I like annual vegetables as much as the next man, but you've got to do it sensibly. So, yep.
Got a really basic, maybe silly question.
Go.
But, compost and soil. Normally talked about two different things, but if you are building compost for your garden, and let's say you only have compost, if you're in the city and you only have concrete, then would compost be soil?
Yes.
Is that the same?
It's the same
name?
thing. Yeah, I use it. Ideally, yes. In an ideal world, yes. Our soils would be basically compost. That would be ideal. In Europe and other countries, yeah, the soil's better. But we haven't got. We're basically at the moment. Most of our farming practices are not good practices. We're basically mining our soil in Australia in particular, and not throughout the world. We're mining our soil. We're not actually looking after it very well at all. Until you get, what's that?
Most of it ends up in blows away.
That's right, blows away. So you get erosion problems every time you dig your soil. You get erosion, you get all these sort of issues. And one of the advantages of perennials, of course, is you don't have to do that. And when you don't do that, you start to, particularly at the moment with climate change and things like that, you start to sequester carbon in the soil, all right, which is another thing that no one talks about. Every time the agricultural sections of what we do with mining practices, if you like, called farming, uses an enormous amount of carbon. Every time you dig your soil, you release carbon into the atmosphere. You cannot but do that. And that's leading to all kinds of problems. I don't know does anybody know what the percentage of agricultural practices lead to global warming? It's enormous. It's like 30% or something worldwide. Just the way we garden, in effect. And so there's other ways to do it. It also makes us incredibly vulnerable to shocks and things by relying on annual vegetable crops. They're not very resilient. We've been breeding annual crops now for the last 2,000 years, and they need a lot of water to maintain, they need a lot of fertiliser to maintain. There's other ways to do this. Interesting thing about perennial vegetables and things like you have a longer season to harvest typically. Once these things have been planted, they last for a long time and you get extended seasons. Yeah. I mean, I have a vegetable garden. I have a forest garden at my place, and I have an annual vegetable garden as well. But I typically don't use. I use no dig methods, and so I don't just turn it over every year. I actually use more sandwich based. I just put compost on top and plant it with that little holes, things like that, because I don't want to destroy that soil structure.